Chapter 1. A Debt Paid in Flesh. The scent of rain-soaked earth and desperation clung to Elara Vance as she stood before the gated entrance to the Blackwood estate. The letter in her hand, a demand for a debt her father could never repay, felt like a death warrant. The alternative, scrawled at the bottom by the cruel hand of Alpha Silas Blackwood, was worse: indenture in his service, where humans were less than pets. Her father's failing health and his well-meaning but foolish dealings with the shifters had led them here. She couldn't let him pay the price. A plan, born of sheer desperation, formed in her mind. There was another Blackwood, the exiled one. Finding Kaelen Blackwood was like tracking a ghost. He resided in a dilapidated watchtower on the very edge of what was once his territory. When she finally stood before him, her breath caught. He was not a broken man. He was a storm contained in human form. His broad shoulders strained against a simple black shirt, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned her with icy disdain. "A human!" he growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her bones. "Have you come to beg for scraps from my brother's table?" "I've come to propose an alliance, Alpha," Elara said, forcing her voice steady, ignoring the primal fear that urged her to flee. She laid out her offer, her family's debt cleared in exchange for her service. She would become his fake human mate. The scandal would be his weapon, a direct challenge to Silas's authority, forcing him to publicly acknowledge Kaelen's claim. Kaelen's laughter was a harsh, humorless sound. "You? A pawn? You would shatter in a day under the weight of our world." "Try me," Elara challenged, meeting his glacial gaze. "You need a weapon he won't expect. Who is more invisible, more underestimated than a human? I can go where you cannot. I can hear what they say when they think no one of importance is listening." A flicker of interest, cold and calculating, passed behind his eyes. He circled her, a predator assessing strange prey. "And when my brother inevitably tries to break you, when the pack turns on you, that is my risk to take. My family's freedom is my reward." He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the wild, clean scent of pine and frost that clung to him. It was a stark contrast to Silas's cloying scent of expensive cologne and malice. "Very well, little pawn," he murmured, his voice dangerously soft. "We have a deal, but remember this. You are a tool to me, nothing more. Step out of line, and you will find my mercy is far colder than my brother's." Chapter 2. The Thorned Crown. The return of Kaelen Blackwood with a human-claimed mate sent shockwaves through the Stormfang pack. The grand hall, where Silas held court, fell into a dead silence as they entered. Silas, seated on a throne-like chair, was everything Kaelen was not: polished, golden-haired, and smiling with venomous charm. His eyes, however, held a glint of pure fury. "Brother," Silas drawled, the word dripping with mockery, "you return to us, and with such interesting company." Elara felt the weight of hundreds of hostile gazes. The air thickened with the aggression of dominant wolves. Her skin prickled, and a wave of nausea hit her, not from fear alone, but a sudden, overwhelming sense of their collective contempt. It was her secret empathy, a curse she'd always hidden, screaming to life. Kaelen's hand clamped possessively on the back of her neck. The touch was meant to be part of the act, but a jolt went through her. Through the fog of the pack's negativity, she felt him. A constant low thrum of rage, a deep, abiding sorrow, and a will of tempered steel. It was more intense, more real than anything she'd ever sensed. "Her name is Elara," Kaelen stated, his voice cutting through the tension. "My mate. You will afford her the respect her position demands." The lie hung in the air, a challenge. Silas's smile didn't waver, but Elara felt his spike of murderous intent like a physical blow. She forced a serene smile onto her face, leaning into Kaelen's touch, playing her part. "A pleasure," Silas said, his eyes promising otherwise. "We shall see how long a human lasts wearing a thorned crown." The days that followed were a trial by fire. Elara was met with open hostility, subtle insults, and accidental shoves in the halls. Kaelen was often absent, plotting his next move, leaving her to navigate the wolf's den alone. He was cold, distant, and critical, constantly expecting her to fail. But she didn't. She used her empathy to avoid the most aggressive pack members, to identify those who were fearful of Silas, and to listen. She heard whispers of a stolen relic, a storm heart, and of a night of betrayal where Kaelen was framed. One evening, after a particularly harsh day, Kaelen found her in the library, tracing the faded family crest on an old tapestry. "You're still here," he remarked, sounding almost disappointed. "I told you I wouldn't break," she said, not looking at him. She could feel his simmering frustration, but beneath it, something else, a grudging curiosity. "Why?" The question was abrupt. "Why endure this for a man who sees you as a tool?" Elara finally turned to him. "For the same reason you endure exile, for family, for justice. The scale is just different." For a long moment, he just stared at her, his wintry gaze searching hers. The air between them crackled with something unspoken, something that felt dangerously real. He took a step closer, and for a heartbeat, Elara thought he might touch her again. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her more unsettled than any pack threat ever could. Chapter 3. The Cracks in the Ice. Kaelen began to include her in his strategies. It was not out of kindness, but utility. Her observations were sharp, her deductions unnervingly accurate. "How do you know this?" he demanded one night, after she correctly identified a traitor in their midst based on a flicker of nervous guilt she'd sensed during a meeting. "I pay attention," she lied smoothly, her heart hammering. "Humans have to. It's how we survive in a world of predators." He didn't look convinced. A new intensity entered his gaze when he looked at her, less of cold assessment and more of genuine intrigue. The wall of ice between them began to develop hairline fractures. The change was terrifying. His proximity, which once only meant fear of discovery, now sent a different kind of thrill through her. She found herself noticing the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the surprising softness of his lips when he was lost in thought, the sheer raw power he contained so carefully. Her empathy became a window into his soul, and what she saw was not the monster he projected. She felt the deep, aching wound of his brother's betrayal, his profound love for his pack, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. The turning point came during a pack hunt. Elara, forced to participate, was separated from the group. A rogue wolf, loyal to Silas, saw his chance. He cornered her, shifting into a monstrous snarling form. Terror paralyzed her. But as the beast lunged, a blur of black and gray slammed into it. Kaelen. The fight was brutal, a whirlwind of teeth, fur, and savage snarls. Kaelen moved with lethal grace, his anger a tangible force. When it was over, the rogue wolf lay subdued, and Kaelen stood over him, blood matting his own fur. He shifted back, his chest heaving, his body crisscrossed with shallow cuts. He turned to Elara, his eyes blazing not with ice, but with a ferocity that stole her breath. "Did he hurt you?" The question was a guttural demand, laced with a possessiveness that was no longer part of their act. She could only shake her head, mute. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks as he searched for any sign of injury. The contact was electric. Through her empathy, she was flooded with it, not just anger, but a blinding, terrifying wave of fear. Fear for her. "He touched you?" Kaelen growled, his voice dropping to a possessive whisper that vibrated through her entire being. "He looked at you with the intent to harm. I felt it. I felt your fear." His forehead dropped to hers, his breath warm against her lips. The world narrowed to this point of contact, to the storm of emotion raging between them. The fake bond they portrayed shimmered, and for a heart-stopping moment, something real and powerful snapped into place. "No one," he vowed, his words a raw promise, "will ever make you feel that fear again." In that moment, Elara knew. The line between pretense and truth had been irrevocably shattered. She was falling for the exiled alpha, and it was a disaster waiting to happen. Chapter 4. The Echo of a Betrayal. The incident changed everything. Kaelen's cold detachment vanished, replaced by a constant simmering awareness of her. He was rarely far from her side, his touches, a guiding hand on her lower back, a brush of his fingers against hers, becoming more frequent, more lingering. The looks he gave her were no longer those of a strategist assessing his pawn, but of a man captivated by a mystery. Elara's empathy was flooded with his growing fascination, his struggle against his own prejudice, and a desire so intense it felt like a physical heat. It was intoxicating and utterly terrifying. Driven by her feelings for him and the need to secure his victory, she focused all her efforts on the mystery of the Stormheart. Her empathy was her guide. She wandered the old parts of the estate, seeking echoes of strong emotion from the past. One afternoon, she found herself in a forgotten sunroom, its windows grimy. As she ran her fingers over a dusty, cracked mantelpiece, a vision slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The heat of anger, the cold shock of betrayal, 2 brothers, Kaelen and Silas, arguing before a hidden wall safe. A small, crystalline object pulsing with the energy of a storm sat inside. Silas grabbing a ceremonial dagger, the flash of metal, a cry of pain, not from Kaelen, from a trusted elder who tried to intervene. Silas's hand, covered in blood, pressing the dagger into a stunned Kaelen's hand. Framing him! Gasping, Elara stumbled back, the vision releasing her. She knew, with absolute certainty, what she had to do. Following the emotional residue, she found a hidden catch behind the mantel. The wall slid open with a groan, revealing a small, empty alcove. But the emotional imprint here was strongest. This was where the Stormheart had been kept. That night, she went to Kaelen's chamber. He was staring out at the moon, his profile etched in silver light. He turned as she entered, and the usual mask of the Alpha was gone. He just looked tired and achingly vulnerable. "I know where it was," she said softly. "The Stormheart." She told him everything, leaving out the source of her knowledge, claiming she'd found old blueprints. As she spoke, his expression shifted from shock to a dawning, furious hope. "It responds to loyalty," she finished, remembering the essence of the vision. to the true heart of the Alpha, not to strength alone. That's why Silas couldn't truly wield it. That's why he had to get rid of it, and you. Kaelen was silent for a long time, just staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. The air between them grew thick and heavy. "Who are you, Elara Vance?" he finally whispered, crossing the room until he stood before her. "You see things no one else can see. You walk into my life and see me when everyone else only sees an exile or a threat." He raised a hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. A shiver racked her body. His touch was no longer that of a calculated partner, but of a man consumed by need. "You are not a pawn," he declared, his voice rough with emotion. "You are a miracle." And then he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was a claiming, a conflagration. It was months of suppressed desire, of icy walls melting in the face of an undeniable truth. Elara kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. Her empathy was swamped with the raw, unfiltered torrent of his feelings, awe, desire, reverence, and a love so profound it shook her to her core. The fake mating was forgotten. This was real. This was fate. Chapter 5. A Bond Forged in Truth. Their world narrowed to the four walls of his chamber. The pretense was over. What existed between them was blazingly, terrifyingly authentic. Kaelen was a man transformed. The cold alpha was gone, replaced by a lover of shocking intensity and breathtaking tenderness. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, learning every curve, every sigh, every secret she had to give. He whispered promises against her skin, promises of a future, of a throne she would share by his side, of a love that would outlast their enemies. For Elara, it was a revelation, to be seen, to be desired, to be cherished, not in spite of her humanity, but because of the strength it gave her, was everything she had never dared to dream of. Their physical joining was more than just passion. It was a sacred sealing of the bond that had already formed between their souls. When he moved inside her, his eyes locked on hers, she felt his love as clearly as she felt her own, a perfect, harmonious resonance. In the quiet moments after, wrapped in his arms, he spoke of his past, of his father, of the pack he loved, of the deep, festering wound of Silas's betrayal. "I thought love was a vulnerability," he confessed, his lips brushing her temple, "a distraction for weaker men. You have shown me it is the greatest strength an alpha can possess." Elara's heart swelled, but a sliver of ice-cold fear lodged within it. She had still not told him the truth of her empathy. What if he saw it as a deception, a manipulation? The happiness felt precarious, built on a foundation of one last vital secret. Their happiness was not unnoticed. Silas watched them with the cold eyes of a viper. He saw the change in his brother, the genuine love that had replaced calculated partnership. It enraged him. His plan to humiliate Kaelen had backfired spectacularly. The human pawn had become a queen in her own right, strengthening his enemy. He knew about the Stormheart's hiding place. He knew they were getting closer, and he knew Elara was the key. The pawn was no longer useful. It was time to take her off the board. Chapter 6. The Pawn's Sacrifice. The confrontation came at the next pack gathering. Silas, with a theatrical flourish, called for order. "Brother," he announced, his voice dripping with false cheer, "your mate has brought such joy to our pack." His eyes slid to Elara, glinting with malice. "But I must confess, a curious document crossed my desk. A contract of debt from a human named Vance, a debt that was mysteriously paid by you, Kaelen, just before this profound mating occurred. The air went out of the room. Elara's blood ran cold. She felt Kaelen go rigid beside her, his confusion and dawning horror like a physical blow through her empathy. "It paints a rather sordid picture, doesn't it?" Silas continued, smiling. "A financial transaction, a purchase companion, not a fated mate at all. You have not only broken our laws by bringing a human into our midst under false pretenses, but you have lied to your entire pack." The pack's mood turned ugly. Growls echoed in the hall. The respect Elara had painstakingly earned evaporated, replaced by a bitter sense of betrayal. "Elara?" Kaelen's voice was a low, pained whisper. He turned to her, his wintry eyes searching hers, begging her to deny it. The trust they had built was cracking before her eyes. She could lie. She could try to spin a story. But seeing his pain, feeling his world crumbling, she knew she couldn't. She loved him too much to lie to him now. She lifted her chin, meeting Silas's triumphant gaze, then turning to face the pack, and finally, Kaelen. "It's true," she said, her voice clear and strong, though her heart was breaking. "The mating was a bargain. My family's freedom in exchange for my service as his pawn." A collective snarl rippled through the crowd. Kaelen flinched as if struck. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. "But the lie ends there," she continued, her voice gaining strength. She turned to him, pouring every ounce of her love into her gaze, hoping he could feel it, even without her empathy. "What began as pretense became real. My loyalty to you, Kaelen Blackwood, is not purchased. It is given freely. My love for you is not a lie. It is the truest thing I have ever known." She looked back at Silas. "You accuse me of deception to hide your own. You speak of a stolen relic, but you never could have wielded the Stormheart. It requires a loyal heart, and yours is rotten to the core." In his fury at her defiance, Silas made a fatal mistake. "The Stormheart was mine by right. It would have obeyed me. I am the Alpha." His confession, born of arrogant rage, hung in the air. The pack fell silent, the truth dawning on them. But it was too late for Elara. Kaelen was staring at her, his expression a mask of betrayal and devastation. He felt the truth of her love, but it was buried under the avalanche of her initial deception. "Take her to the cells," Silas commanded, seizing his victory. "The human has confessed her crimes against pack law." As guards moved forward, Elara didn't fight. She kept her eyes on Kaelen, silently pleading for him to understand. But he turned away. His shoulders slumped in defeat, the ice back in his eyes colder and harder than ever before. The pawn had been sacrificed, and it felt like her soul had been torn in two. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Agony. Kaelen paced the confines of his old chambers, a caged animal. Elara's words echoed in his skull. "My love for you is not a lie." He had felt the truth of it in her kiss, seen it in her eyes, felt it in the way she yielded to him. But it was built on a foundation of a financial transaction, a cold, calculated deal. The pain was excruciating. He had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to love, and it had all been based on a lie. Her intelligence, her courage, her seeming understanding of him, it had all been part of a performance to pay a debt. Yet her defiance of Silas replayed in his mind, the raw conviction in her voice, the way she had turned his brother's triumph into a moment of doubt for the pack. She had sacrificed herself, not to save her own skin, but to expose Silas. For him, a war raged inside him, between the betrayed alpha who saw a manipulative human and the man who had known the profound connection of her soul. His wolf, usually a voice of clear instinct, was conflicted. It howled in agony at her absence, yearning for her scent, her touch. It remembered her fear during the attack, her courage in the face of the pack, the absolute rightness of her body against his. He thought of her, locked in a cold, dark cell because of him, because of their deal. The memory of her pleading gaze as she was led away was a knife twisting in his gut. His love for her, real or not, was a weakness Silas had exploited. To save her, he had to win. And to win, he needed the one thing only she could find, the storm heart. The relic responded to loyalty, to the true heart of the Alpha. She had told him that. She had believed in him even as he turned away from her. With a roar of pure anguish and determination, he smashed his fist into the stone wall. The pain cleared his head. The pawn was off the board. Now it was time for the king to reclaim his throne and his queen. Chapter 8. The Stormheart's Cry. Alone in the darkness, Elara felt nothing. The emotional onslaught of the pack's betrayal and Kaelen's rejection had shut her empathy down, leaving her numb and hollow. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Then a faint, familiar pulse echoed through the stone floor. It was a feeling, not a sound. A call, a deep, rhythmic thrum of pure, untamed power. It was lonely. It was lost. It was waiting for its true master, the Stormheart. It wasn't gone. It was hidden deeper, calling out. And her empathy, attuned to the strongest of emotions, could hear its cry. It was beneath her, in the dungeons themselves. Igniting a spark of hope, she pressed her hands against the cold stone of her cell wall, closing her eyes. She let her mind drift, following the pulse, the faint echo of ancient loyalty and immense power. There, behind a false wall in the darkest corner of the dungeon, a place no one would ever think to look. The relic had been hidden in the one place synonymous with disloyalty and betrayal, a final insult from Silas. Using a loose stone, she chipped away at the crumbling mortar, her hands bleeding, her muscles screaming. Finally, a stone gave way. Reaching into the darkness, her fingers closed around something cold and crystalline. As she pulled it out, the Stormheart flared to life in her hand. It was a large, multifaceted crystal, and within its depths a miniature storm raged. Clouds swirled and tiny bolts of lightning flickered. It didn't burn her. Instead, it hummed in her grasp, responding to the one thing she had in abundance, her loyal, self-sacrificing heart. The door to her cell clanged open. Silas stood there, his face a mask of fury. I felt its awakening. You meddling human witch, give it to me. He lunged for her. Elara held the Stormheart tight. It will never obey you. A blast of energy erupted from the crystal, throwing Silas back against the wall. The Stormheart was protecting her. But she knew she couldn't wield it. It wasn't hers to command. It was waiting for its alpha. Chapter 9. The True Alpha's Claim. The dungeon door exploded inwards, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Kaelen stood in the doorway, silhouetted by torchlight, his eyes blazing pure molten gold. His wolf was at the surface, fueled by a righteous fury she had never felt in him before. He took in the scene. Silas scrambling to his feet, and Elara holding the pulsing, storm-filled heart of his birthright. Their eyes met. In that instant, everything else fell away. The betrayal, the pain, the lies. All he saw was the woman he loved, holding his destiny in her hands, having risked everything to find it. And all she saw was the man she loved, coming for her. "It's yours," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She held it out to him. "It always has been." Silas snarled and shifted, a monstrous wolf launching himself at Kaelen. Kaelen met him mid-air in a clash of fur and fury. The fight was epic, a brutal ballet of power and hatred. But Kaelen was different. He was not fighting for vengeance alone anymore. He was fighting for her, for their future. The love he had once seen as a weakness now coursed through him, making him stronger, faster, more focused. Elara watched, her heart in her throat, the storm heart pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. As the brothers fought, Silas gained the upper hand, his teeth closing around Kaelen's throat. Elara cried out. In that moment, Kaelen's eyes found hers. Love, clear and unwavering, passed between them. He stopped fighting against Silas's grip. Instead, he reached out a hand not to strike, but to receive. Understanding, Elara threw the storm heart. It flew through the air in a blazing arc of lightning. Kaelen's fingers closed around it. The effect was instantaneous. A shock wave of pure elemental power exploded from him, throwing Silas across the dungeon. Kaelen rose to his feet, unharmed. The storm heart was fused to his palm, lightning crackling up his arm, his eyes glowing with the power of the storm itself. He was no longer just an alpha. He was a force of nature. He spoke, and his voice was the rumble of thunder. "Silas Blackwood, you are guilty of treason against your alpha and your pack. Your reign of fear ends now." The pack, who had gathered at the entrance, fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the legitimate ancient power radiating from their true alpha. Defeated and broken, Silas could only bow his head. Chapter 10. Her crown, his heart. The coronation was not held in the grand hall, but in the ruins of the old watchtower where their journey began, under the open sky and a full moon. Kaelen, now the undisputed alpha, stood before his pack, the Stormheart's power a gentle hum around him. But his eyes were only for one person. He reached for Elara, who stood at the front of the crowd, and drew her up to stand beside him. Her hand was warm in his. "This victory is not mine alone," he declared, his voice carrying to every wolf present. "It was won by the courage, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty of my fated mate. She saw the true alpha when I had forgotten who I was. She found my heart when it was lost. She is my strength, my equal, and my Luna." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. The ice in his eyes was gone, replaced by a love so deep and fierce it stole her breath. "Elara Vance," he said for her alone, "I accused you of deception when the greatest deception was my own, the lie I told myself that I could not love you. You are the best part of me, my humanity, my heart. Will you rule beside me, not as a pawn, but as my queen? Forever?" Tears streamed down Elara's face as she felt the truth of his words, not through her empathy, but through the bond that now shone, brilliant and unbreakable, between their souls. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of love. "Always." As the pack's joyful howls erupted into the night, celebrating their true alpha and Luna, Kaelen kissed her. It was a kiss of promise, of passion, of a future brighter than any they could have imagined. Later, wrapped in furs under the stars, their bodies still humming from a different kind of joining, Kaelen nuzzled her neck. "I have one last question, my love," he murmured. "How did you truly know about the storm heart, about the loyalty?" Elara took a deep breath, finally free of her last secret. She placed his hand over her heart. "I feel things, Kaelen, strong emotions I always have. I felt your pain, your honor, your love. I felt the Stormheart's call. It's who I am. Instead of anger or shock, a look of awe spread across his face. He kissed her gently. My miraculous, extraordinary mate, you will never have to hide any part of yourself from me again. And as they lay together, two halves of a whole, the human and the wolf, the pawn and the king, they knew their game was over. They had won the only thing that ever truly mattered, each other.